Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm your matriarch, Tabitha, and today we are covering Season 2, Episode 22, What's in It for Mia? This episode was shot mid-January 1972, and it aired on February 24th, 1972. So, when I said a couple of episodes that Roger got to interpret Hayes his own way in OK Corral, I was wrong. This was the first episode shot after the biggest game in the West. So, chronologically, this would be the first episode where he didn't have to try and duplicate Pete's performance. My mistake. The story was by Roy Huggins, and the teleplay was by Huggins and William D. Gordon. Gordon previously wrote Shootout at Diablo Station, and this will be his last ASJ episode. The episode was directed by John Dumas. Now, John Dumas was mainly an editor. He actually only has a few directing credits to his name. This episode of ASJ, and 3 episodes of the Hardy Boys / Nancy Drew mysteries. He was actually the editor on several ASJ episodes. He was also the editor on Pete's TV movie How to Steal an Airplane. His first editing credit was for the TV movie Drive Fast, Drive Hard, which was co-written by Roy Huggins. He worked on The Bold Ones, The Lawyers, The Rockford Files, Switch, McCloud, The A-Team, The Greatest American Hero, Riptide, and Hunter. He also worked on some other TV movies like Dark Victory, Chicago Story, and Child Bride of Short Creek. Ooh, that sounds upsetting. He did a couple of miniseries as well, Ellis Island and Chiefs. I couldn't really find anything else about him personally, unfortunately. I don't even know his date of death. Assuming he's dead. If he's alive, my apologies. Our guest stars this week include the trailblazer Ida Lupino as Mia Bronson. I love this woman, and I'm about to go off into the weeds about her, so indulge me, won't you? At a time when directing was a total boys' club, Lupino was the lone female voice in Hollywood. She wasn't the first. In fact, at the birth of cinema, there were a lot of female directors. Lois Weber, Alice Guy Blanche, and Dorothy Arzner, who was even allowed to work into the sound era. Gee, thanks, men. Those are just a few of the early pioneers. In fact, Arzner and Lupino were the first 2 women to be admitted into the Directors Guild. Ida Lupino started her career as an actor, and there was a long history of actresses turning directors, and that's for a good reason. Successful actresses who already have some degree of power and influence will have an easier time in Hollywood getting their projects off the ground. Lupino herself made this point, saying, quote, "For women, directing is almost impossible to do, unless you're an actress or a writer with power," end quote. Lupino was born in London, but moved to Hollywood to pursue her acting career. She was in movies like The Light That Failed, The Seawolf, High Sierra, and Anything Goes. And I think she was pretty hard on herself as an actor, too, calling herself the poor man's Bette Davis. She was offered a lot of roles that Davis turned down, and she turned them down as well, which good for her. Her directing career began when she and her then-husband Collier Young started a production company called The Filmmakers. They began production on a movie called Not Wanted, when just a few days into shooting, the director Elmer Clifton suffered a heart attack and was out of commission. Lupino had written the screenplay and was a producer on the project, so she stepped in to direct the movie. Because at such last minute, her fledgling production company couldn't afford to hire anyone else. She doesn't have official credit on this film, but she had directed a financially successful movie, and thus her second career was born. If you've seen any of her other movies, it was probably the film noir The Hitchhiker, which is an awesome, tense little movie that I highly recommend. Other films include Outrage, Never Fear, and her last film, The Trouble with Angels. She also directed quite a bit for television, shows like 77 Sunset Strip, Have Gun Will Travel, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Thriller, The Untouchables, The Fugitive, The Rifleman, Gilligan's Island, The Virginian, and Daniel Boone. She also directed the Twilight Zone episode The Masks, the only woman to direct an episode of The Twilight Zone. And she kept acting through it all. She starred in just one movie that she directed herself called The Bigamist, and she's just an inspiration to me. The second woman to get her name on the Directors Guild. I think that's pretty damn impressive. Ida Lupino passed away in 1995 at age 77. Thank you for listening to all that. Next up, we have Buddy Ebsen as George Austin. Of course, he's most famous for starring as Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies, a show that I've just never taken to. But I guess I haven't actually tried to watch it since I was a little kid and the grandma freaked me out for some reason. If you don't know him from that, then you know him either as Barnaby Jones or as the guy who almost got to play the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. Ebsen was born in my hometown, which is super cool. His career started on Broadway as a dancer. He had a vaudeville act with his sister, Vilma. The two moved to Hollywood in the 1930s. Vilma decided to quit the business fairly early on, but Buddy kept at it. He worked on movies like Broadway Melody of 1936, Captain January, Born to Dance, Breakfast at Tiffany, and Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. He worked a lot in television, including Maverick, The Andy Griffith Show, Rawhide, and Tales of Wells Fargo. He was originally cast as the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, but he and Ray Bolger ended up switching parts. Now cast as the Tin Man, Ebsen had an allergic reaction to the aluminum dust makeup that the production was using on him, so he was forced to drop out lest he die. He was replaced by Jack Haley. They used aluminum paste on Haley. Ouch. That's really gotta suck. I mean, I guess starring in 2 hit television shows later in life was consolation enough, but still, The Wizard of Oz might be the most famous movie in the entire world. Well, maybe Star Wars. Ebsen passed away in 2003 at age 95. And finally, we have Sally Shockley as Charlotte Austen. Shockley was previously in the Season 1 episode Stagecoach 7. This episode, just like The Biggest Game in the West, it was based on the Maverick episode Rage for Vengeance. Okay, that was a lot. Why are we here again? Right, episode. Let's talk about it. No sneak peek this week, but the boys are filthy and full-bearded again. Because they've been prospecting. Again, why is this their new thing? I don't like it. They're in a place called King City. There's a 3-hour wait at the barber shop, so they have some time to kill. They head over to the local casino and join a game. Why is the kid allowed to play? Make him go play the old-timey slot machines. Very quickly, Hayes notices that something's wrong. He spots the owner, Mia Bronson, and he and the kid decide to go and have a little chat with her. And Buddy Ebsen gets the special guest star credit this week. Really? Over Ida Lupino? Misogyny! After the opening credits, Mia leads them into her office, followed very closely by 2 goons. Hayes says that he'd like to sell her own deck of cards to her for only $250. Because it is a marked deck. Ooh, Hayes is being sassy. She tells them to prove it, which they apparently can't do. That disappoints me because I like when Hayes shows off stuff like that. Come on, he can feel if there's one card missing from an entire deck, but he can't figure out how this deck is marked? Hashtag not my Hayes. They threaten to tell the whole town about her crooked casino, and Kid outdraws her goons. Unfortunately, there's another one behind them. They disarm the boys and then proceed to beat the shit out of them and dump them outside of town. Boys, I am so embarrassed by the both of you right now. Luckily, some good Samaritans, the Austins, come across them and somehow get them back to their house. And they put them in the same bed together to recover. Oh my god, it's like a fanfic. But hey, the Austins don't know their situation. What if they were like mortal enemies and had beaten each other half to death? And then they wake up in the same bed like, you son of a bitch, I'll finish what I started. I'm just saying, they have no way of knowing that. Anyway, George Austen, the father, has given up his bed to the boys, and his daughter Charlotte is keeping watch over them. Hayes has nightmares about Mia and then regains consciousness for a few minutes. He asks where the kid is, but is coherent enough to keep calling him Thaddeus. He prods at Kid next to him until he moves, proving that he's alive. Then Hayes feels safe to pass out again. It's actually pretty sweet. The next day, Kid is awake and wants to know where they are. Hayes tells him about George and Charlotte rescuing them, but Kid notices that they're still in town. They are worried that they might be back in King City. They wander out of the bedroom after they've shaved and properly meet George and Charlotte. George confirms that they are still in King City. The boys tell them how they ended up half dead in a ditch. Oh, they know all about Mia Bronson. She owns the town, basically, and ran George's newspaper out of business. The guys want to move on, but they don't have any horses or guns. Mia put George out of business because he stood up for her in his newspaper. He called her out on her crooked shenanigans. George ended up having to sell the paper for $10,000, but it turns out that the buyer was working for Mia. That's just so mean. Kid and Charlotte share a kiss in the kitchen because he's just so darn cute after he's shaved. I get it, girl. While the 4 of them are having dinner that evening, Kid notices that George has a fake $10 bill. George says, yeah, it's for a chemical printing process he's been working on. He takes them out to see his printing press. He says he's been working on it for quite a while. He and Charlotte are planning on going back east because they're running out of money. He's hoping he can get a firm interested in his new process that can help him perfect it. He also tells him that there's no way to turn this method into an actual counterfeiting operation because everything comes out in reverse. He just uses money for his tests sometimes because the ink has high quality. Charlotte thinks Hayes must be bored of this conversation because he's being very quiet. Oh, no, not bored. Quite the opposite, actually. He's coming up with a brilliant plan. He asked the Austins how they'd like to get a lot of money out of Mia before they head back east. George is reluctant. He doesn't want to do anything illegal. Our boys would never do that anymore, where they could get caught. I mean, they do it all the time. They're just sneakier about it now. George warns them that Mia doesn't always stop at having people beaten up. Sometimes she just flat out has them killed. But that doesn't really dissuade them. George is open to hearing the plan. The next day, the boys have put on their good clothes again, question, where did they get them? She dumped them out of town with only the clothes on their backs. Where did they get their good clothes? I mean, I guess I could ask that about several episodes, so why pick on it now? Anyway, they go back to Mia's casino with some funny money. She has them brought back into her office. They play dumb, like they didn't mean to get caught with it. And Kid told him not to use the counterfeit money here, didn't he? But she's not actually angry. She's just interested in how they got counterfeit money that is so close to the real deal. The only problems are the smell and the serial numbers on the bills. They take her back to the Austin house. Mia takes a moment to gloat about how George acted so high and mighty and better than her, and here he is printing phony money. They put on quite a good show of showing the process of printing this fake money, talking about how long and complicated the whole thing is. They promise her she won't lose a dime just by getting a demonstration from them. She eventually agrees. She gives them a $10 bill. They say that sometime the next morning, she'll have a brand new duplicate of her $10 bill, and she should drop back by if she wants to see it. After she leaves, they get to work. Hayes just changes the serial number on a real $10 bill so that the numbers match that of hers. And the next morning, Mia comes back to see her new fake bill. She inspects both of them very carefully and buys into it hook, line, and sinker. And she wants more. More, I say! After all, you don't get to be the second woman inducted into the Directors Guild by using real U.S. currency. Hayes tells Mia that working in neighboring towns, they can drum up about $1,000 a week. Oh, but that's not enough for Miss Mia Bronson. Instead of using $10 bills, she wants them printing $1,000 bills. If they print her $20,000, she will leave them alone. Well, that sounds like a good deal. After she leaves again, Hayes and George are talking about how they'll divide up their money. Hayes thinks they ought to keep it simple, with a nice even 50-50. But George thinks that Hayes and Kid should get 1/3 apiece. He's a good guy. But Hayes insists 50-50 is fair. Besides, Kid's money is Hayes' money, and Hayes' money is Kid's money. That's just the way it is. Kid and Charlotte are talking about their plans too. He wants to know if she's going to be okay with just walking away from everything. She says the house and the furniture don't technically even belong to them. All that really matters is what's in her dad's notebook. They kiss again and, I don't know, maybe squeeze in a quickie, who can say. Later that night, George thinks that Charlotte ought to leave town early, because he's worried about something happening to her if they get found out. But she wants to stick around to see Mia suffer. Ooh, catfight. Mia eventually returns with the $20K. She brought 4 goons with her for protection as well. They all sit down and start this fake process all over again. Once the bills are now in the waiting stage, she takes the machine back with her to her place. Whoops! Didn't think about that one, did you, Hayes? The boys and the Austins are freaking out. Kid recommends that they all get on the train and just leave town. Hayes agrees that the Austins should go, but Hayes has another idea for himself. And, of course, the Kid by extension. Kid's like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Poor thing. Hayes is willing to bet that Mia will open the printing press before the time is up. And if she does that, then they can claim that's why the process didn't work. Because it can't be disturbed at all. But he can't know for sure that she'll open it, the others claim. But despite what this show and Hayes claims, he is a gambler. He takes risks like this all the time. And most of the time they pay off. Occasionally they don't, but mostly they do. George says that either they all get on the train together or they all miss the train together. Aww, George. You're a good guy. So they're all going to take the risk. The next morning, Hayes and Kid go to Mia's office. He calls her out on opening the printing press. She denies it at first, but Hayes sticks to his guns, and eventually she admits to opening the press, but only for a second. She believes their story that that's what ruined the whole process, so they have to try it again. They go back to the Austins, and while her back is turned, they quickly switch out the press with the $20,000 in it for a different, identical one that they just have lying around. Well, I guess it's not that weird. But literally, this is just what they did with the envelopes in the last episode. I love that their plans these days boil down to just waiting until the bad guy looks away and pulling a quick switcheroo. Once she's gone, the Austins and the guys take the $20,000 and hop on a train. On board, the boys are playing poker again when Charlotte would like to talk to them in private. Charlotte says $10,000 is great for her and her father and all, but wouldn't $20,000 be better? Since they couldn't have done any of this without him after all. Because you see, she has found out who they really are. Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry. Okay, this is getting ridiculous. She says it's because when they were still unconscious, they were mumbling to each other and calling each other by their real names. Like how Hayes deliriously gave them away way back in The Fifth Victim. But still, must we go through this every week? Kid tries to charm her because, hey, didn't they make out? Isn't he a great kisser? Surely he means more to her than that. Nope, turns out he means nothing to her. Sure, she had fun with him and all, and she likes him, but it's not going any further than that. Oh, and by the way, a U.S. Marshal is on the train, so if they don't give her the money, she's gonna turn them in. Poor Kid. He really thought he was leaving a trail of broken hearts behind him. But I bet most of them are probably like Charlotte. Hayes says, well, they've never made a noble gesture in the name of science before, and Kid reminds him that they have, actually, with the Chauncey Beauregard wing at the San Francisco hospital. Yay for continuity. Look, it's give up the money, go to jail, or jump off a fast-moving train to their deaths. What sounds like the best option? Of course they give all the money to George. I can't really blame Charlotte for wanting her and her father to have the full $20,000. It makes sense, but I still feel bad for the boys. Yes, it was George's printing press, but it was Hayes' idea. They deserve something. They never come out on top. In the tag, there are flyers all over King City about entering a contest for $1,000 to figure out how Mia is marking cards to help stop her crooked gambling. Courtesy of Joshua Smith and Thaddeus Jones. And Mia's like, no, my empire is crumbling. She opens the printing press, and sure enough, it's filled with nothing but blank sheets of paper. Men are always trying to keep women down, I swear to God. The end. I like this episode. I've said I'm not big on con episodes, and that is true, but this con is simple and doesn't involve 75 moving parts and disguises. And it's very intimate. There's only 3 outside characters involved. The Austins are a likable little family, and Mia is a great villain. She was originally written to be a man, but I think switching the sex of the character really worked. It made her more memorable because we've seen men like that a dime a dozen on this show, but we rarely get a female villain like this. I don't really have a line of the week. It's a good episode, but none of the lines especially popped for me. But the episode goes to Hayes. Like last week, he came up with the plan and stuck to it even when it looked like they were beaten. Next time on Alias Smith & Jones, we've come to the Season 2 finale. Georgette is back, and she's looking for a stolen diamond. Research for this podcast comes mainly from the wonderful book Alias Smith & Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men, by Sandra K. Segala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Additional research comes from the YouTube channel Be Kind Rewind, and their excellent video, Actresses Who Direct, Barbara Streisand and Ida Lupino. Thanks for listening.